One of the things we haven't spoken about much yet on the Cappuccino Club social TV channel is how COVID-19 has affected early childhood. And today we're going to be talking to Professor Atwood. He's going to talk us, he's from the Center for Early Childhood Development, and he's going to shed some light on that subject for us. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Most people would rather watch a quick video clip than read your story. So tell your story live and authentically using live video. If you just joined us, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Brigitte Lambanda from Cape Town in South Africa. And my co-host is Viola Manuel. Viola, welcome to the show.
Welcome. We've had such a lovely sort of production break. So I'm so excited to be back in studio and back talking to our guests and our viewers. So thanks, Brigitte. How are things going on your side?
Going very well, very well. We had some action on my side. First, no electricity for about a week. So that was interesting, followed by some nasty toothache. So it's been a swell time these last 2 weeks.
Look, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's sort of become the mantra for quite a few people during this lockdown period. So, but I'm glad to see you're doing well. I'm excited to speak to Professor Eric Atmore. I've known him for a while, does amazing stuff, extremely passionate about the subject matter. So being able to speak about what's happening in early childhood development is such an important discussion for us. So I'm quite keen to speak to him.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't know Professor Atmore, he is the founding director of the Center for Early Childhood Development, and he's also an extraordinary associate professor in education policy studies at the University of Stellenbosch. And as I said in the introduction, one thing we haven't spoken about a lot is early childhood development and the effect that COVID-19 has had on that, because it definitely must have impacted everyone else. And sometimes we tend to forget about the little ones and what has it done to their development. So we're going to find out a bit more about that. So let's not waste any more time and invite Professor Atmore.
Good evening, Professor Atmore. How are you?
I'm fine. Good evening, Viola. It's lovely to see you. And good evening, Brigitte. Let's talk early childhood development.
Yes, but before we talk about early childhood development, let's talk about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, and why early childhood development. Of all the sectors you could have gone into, why early childhood development?
My background is an interesting one. You know, I was born in the mid-50s, so that exposes me already as being ancient. But I was born in an area called Woodstock and brought up in Woodstock, and that was it was a working class area. It was the 1950s, 1960s when times were tough, and I had a very, very happy childhood. Although there was never lots of cash around, I remember growing up with no fridge, with no stove, with no television. No hot water. We heated water by chopping wood and putting it into those old, beautiful brass geysers. So we grew up in difficult circumstances, but I had two parents who were minimally educated. My mother had standard 6 and my father had standard 8. But they told me to do 3 things. They told me to read, they told me to read, and they told me to read. And ever since then, I've been reading 2, 3 newspapers and 1 or 2 books every single week. So I think what pushed me in the direction of early childhood development was a very happy childhood,
Mm.
2 supportive parents, and they would do anything for me. I then went on through high school. Viola, you'll be interested that I failed standard 6, and that my maths mark was 8%.
Oh
I
my.
then failed. I then failed mock matric. You'll recall we used to
Yes.
write mock matric, and I failed that. I happened to get into university, and let me unashamedly say, I got into university because I had a white skin. You know,
Okay.
it was that period. It was the early 1970s, and people of color were barred from UCT. So they ended up taking underachievers like myself. And I got an opportunity to go to university and ended up with a degree in social development, went on to do an honors degree in social planning, to do a master's degree in social policy, and then eventually a doctorate in education policy studies. So I think my move into early childhood development was gradual, and I don't know what forces were shaping me or directing me, but there was
Mm.
certainly something there. And my first job was in Bishop Lavis and Elsie's River, working with young people on the streets, in the gangs, mostly nighttime work. And that set me on my career path. I then became director of the Buxton Childcare Centre, then went to Grassroots Educare Trust as deputy director, and in 1994 started the Centre for Early Childhood Development. So it's been a varied journey, but I sit back today in my mid 60s and I say, thank goodness. It's been such a
Mm.
rewarding career, having worked with
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of children and increasingly with young people and seeing what a wonderful country we've got.
Yes, yes. So Professor Atmore, who exactly does the Center for Early Childhood Development serve? What gaps do you fill in the community?
When we started in 1994, we were a child of the democratic transition. And the story goes that the World Bank commissioned some people to do a study on early childhood development in South Africa. I was one of those people. And we basically laid the foundations and the policy for early childhood development for a government in waiting. Now, in the
Okay.
early 1990s, we knew that the African National Congress would be the majority party. They would win the elections, which they did. So unlike in countries where there's been an overnight revolution and there's been nothing in place, no policies, no infrastructure, we had a ready-made package of policies which the ANC adopted, and that's the foundation of Grade R. So fast forward to what we do now, and we train teachers. We're an accredited early childhood development teacher training institution. We build
Mm.
preschools from scratch. We provide educational equipment. We do a lot of policy work and a lot of research work. And we work in all 9 provinces. And we've been fortunate enough to work in 1 or 2 African countries, Lesotho, Namibia, Ghana. So we basically your national resource in early childhood
Okay.
development in South Africa.
Wow. Okay. So Professor Atmore, what has been some of the biggest challenges you all have experienced as the center with the whole lockdown and this whole COVID experience? And how have you managed to continue to sort of support the community you work for?
From March the 17th, when the lockdown was spoken about and when it was implemented a week later, early childhood development centers have been radically impacted upon. When we went into lockdown level 5, ECD centers were closed. Now, those have had huge challenges on young children, on their teachers, and on their parents. If we start off with young children, we've got about 2.5 million young children in an early childhood development facility in South Africa each day. That meant that 2.5 million children were not getting the early learning opportunities, the early literacy work, the early numeracy work, and the acquisition of life skills that they would ordinarily have got. They were suddenly confronted one day that preschool is closed. So that's the first thing. They didn't have those early learning opportunities, and it's now gone on for almost 4 months. The second thing is that for the vast majority of those children, the really vulnerable ones, their main meal each day is what they have at the center. And with centers being closed, they missed out on that nutritious meal. And that has had devastating effects. We've seen figures of malnutrition and stunting increasing significantly. The third impact has been on the teachers. We've got about 180,000 early childhood development teachers across the country. They were suddenly without salaries. Now, a few of the more elite, wealthy centers would have been able to pay salaries, but for the overwhelming majority, salaries stopped in the second week of March. And those women have now gone, because they're predominantly women, those women have now gone for 4.5, 5 months with no salary. And that has a devastating effect on not only the individual, but on the family.
Yes.
And then lastly, parents. When we came down to level 3, about 90% of the country is able to go back to work. But parents, if you don't have a facility for your child, you cannot go back to work. So it's been a really difficult time for children, for teachers, and for parents. And I'm afraid it's going to take us years to get out of that hole that we've been dug, that we've dug ourselves into. A few early childhood centers will thrive, they'll come through, and these are the ones in affluent areas. But my estimate is that anything up to 4,000 early childhood centers will not reopen. And our experience this past week is that those centers that have opened, they are getting maybe 1/10 of the number of children that they had on closure. So it's had a devastating effect.
Wow. Okay. That's why we need to have these conversations, because, you sort of guess that there's impact, but you don't really understand the full extent of the impact in sectors like the early childhood development sector. In your opinion, what aspect of early childhood development has been most affected by the unintended consequences of COVID?
I think it's on the social side, and it's young children. Young children are social beings. They love interacting. They love hugging. They love playing with your hair. They love pulling your leg. And for a child to be told, first of all, you cannot visit your grandparents because there's a risk involved. Now, if a child regularly sees their grandparents or even lives with grandparents, that's very, very difficult for a 3-year-old to understand. And then social distancing, that's not a concept in young children's minds. They're not distances. They don't naturally run away from people. They gravitate towards people. So I think that's being a huge consequence and unintended of the lockdown. And then obviously the ones I've given earlier about nutrition. That for me is really, I don't think it was thought through properly, because what should have happened is that as those ECD centers were closed, government should have made provision to provide food to those early childhood centers. You've got a captured audience. The parents and the children all come from a surrounding community. You could have set up soup kitchens and food depots at early childhood development centers. But we didn't. And I think that's sad.
It's very sad. And what's interesting for me is that, just even in our discussions, one of the things we've been talking about is who have government then consulted, in terms of some of the solutions they came up with. Because, as we are having these conversations and speaking to experts and people who are in the know like yourself, lots of amazing suggestions have come through. But for me right now, what I did want to find out from you with the whole COVID experience and the whole lockdown experience, has it highlighted any inefficiencies in policy with regards to early childhood development? Because I think it's quite important that we understand that.
Viola, not so much in policy, because 5 years ago, the cabinet approved the National Integrated Early Childhood Development Policy. And that's a brilliant policy. It's world class. And I wouldn't say that if it wasn't correct.
Okay.
The problem has been in implementation. And the gaps that have been exposed are that it took the social development minister and department about 3 months to say the first word about early childhood development. And then it was a very negative one. Early childhood development centers were barred from opening. And it took a very conservative trade union to take government to court. And as you may have read, the judge of the High Court ruled in favor of this preschool and of this preschool body, and compelled the social development minister to open ECD centers immediately. So I think what it's exposed is a lack of political will on the side of government. It's exposed lack of capacity of public officials in the social development department and in the basic education department. And it's also exposed, for me, an uncaring Department of Social Development. We thought about all the other industries before early childhood development was opened. So some schools were opened, hairdressing salons were opened, retail stores were opened, restaurants were opened, and only then was early childhood development centers opened. And it wasn't opened voluntarily. It was opened through a court case, through a judgment of the High Court. So I think largely government has forgotten about our children. The other element which I should have picked up on earlier is that as our children stay more and more on the streets, so they're more and more at risk. And in Cape Town, we've had 3 or 4 deaths of children, the youngest being 2 years old, of children who ordinarily would have been in an early childhood development center, but were on the streets and were hit by stray bullets, were hit by cars. And I really think that as a country, we deserve more. The late and great Oliver Tambo said, a nation or a country that forgets its children does not deserve its future. And I think what COVID has exposed, to answer your question, is COVID showed us that government has forgotten its children. Government bent over backwards to accommodate the taxi industry. It bent over backwards to accommodate many, many industries. It bailed out, it made 1.2 billion rand available to taxis. It has not made 1 cent of additional money available to early childhood development.
Wow. Yeah. So when you put it in, when you start putting things into perspective, like you have now, it's, you just want to shake your head in shame, because, it's completely unacceptable for me as a South African to listen to this and say, to not be completely ashamed with the way we've behaved, and it's not just the taxi industry. There's been a huge discussion around wine. There's been lots of discussion around cigarettes. There's all these things have taken preeminence in the media, in government discussion, and our children have been left behind. It's actually quite sad. So I know that the center has done an amazing amount of work. You guys have just, I think, done a SNAP scan challenge as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you as the center and your team have done to just try and help the situation?
Once we knew that there was a lockdown and that we wouldn't be back, certainly not for level 5 or level 4, we sat down and put our heads together. And I must say, this is my younger colleagues, and I'm talking about in their 20s, because they generally get bad press and bad publicity. These young people in their 20s have come to the fore. They set up food kitchens in Red Hill, in Simonstown, in Mariesburg, in Philippi, in Kalkfontein, and in a whole number of areas, Lavender Hill. And my colleagues were lugging food on a daily basis to feed children. When they saw the need, they suddenly expanded it to feed parents as well and grandparents. And still today, 4 months later, they're out every single day feeding children and feeding parents and feeding grandparents. Now, we've had our donors have come to the party. They've been phenomenal. We have not asked a single donor for a cent. They've come to us and they've said, we want to make a contribution. And these are not only Cape Town or South African donors, these are international donors. What you're referring to, two of my colleagues, Bridget Karts and Chanel Fredericks, who I think you know, they came to me and they said, Eric, we want to do a SnapScan initiative. I pretended I knew what SnapScan meant. In the meantime, I went to the bathroom and Googled SnapScan. And I found out what SnapScan was. And I said to them, go for it.
Yeah.
And what they've done is they've raised about 20,000 Rand.
Wow.
And we've committed that every single cent will go towards purchasing the protective equipment that early childhood centers need. So for a center to open, it needs to be ready. And it needs the sanitizers, the masks, the thermometers and all that stuff. So what we've done is, in addition to the food, we're now helping centers to become operational by supplying all the sanitizers, all the PPE. And I must say, that's what my younger colleagues have done. They've really come to the party. They've rolled their sleeves up. They've pulled their jeans up. They're in their tackies, and they're working every single day. So, you know, the next person who complains to me about young people, they're going to get an earful, because our young people are phenomenal.
Yeah. What's been interesting for me, Eric, is that was just an amazing pivot, because, you know, there was social distancing. People were not allowed to do much fundraising in the traditional sense. So for them to sort of stand outside and with SnapScan, you know, QR codes, you could drive past and actually make your contribution by just, contributing using SnapScan. So that's an amazing story in terms of how you all had a chance to pivot. But we do have this new normal now. Kids are standing in queues to have their temperatures taken. Everybody, like you say, kids are told you can't hug, you can't stand next to your friends, you can't play the games that you were playing. And I know a lot of parents must be talking to you about the stresses that they are experiencing with their kids being in the situation. What word of advice would you give to moms and dads who are a little overwhelmed, not sure whether to send their kids or not send their kids back to their early childhood centers? What would you say to moms and dads who come to you and say to you, what do we do?
We've had hundreds of phone calls asking that exact question, not only from ECD teachers, but from parents as well. And it's understandable that parents are concerned. I think I'd say two things to them, and we have been saying this. One, we will come through this. You know, South Africa has come through so many things. We've come through colonialism. We've come through apartheid. We will get through this, and we will come out on the other side stronger. Number two, I would say that it's always been certainly my belief, and there's a body of thought globally, that the primary educators of young children are parents. Early education does not take place in a building. It takes place in a community, in a society. And increasingly important with young children is this idea of nurturing care. That yes, we can teach children to count. We can teach children the alphabet and to recognize shapes and sizes. But that care, the hand on the head, ruffling the hair, that reinforcing pat on the back, that hug, those things are also important. And I think parents also at this point have to be honest and open about what coronavirus is. I think often we underestimate our children's ability to understand. Now, I have seen some practices which I think are not right. For example, calling coronavirus a monster. I think that conjures up ideas of being scared and somebody's out there. But with my own grandchildren, their parents have been totally open and honest with them, given them a bit of the medical background, but also explained that if you want to avoid getting sick, these are the things that you have to do. I think the overwhelming majority of parents will do their utmost to protect their children. And my strong plea would be, love your children, hold them tight, make them feel secure, and we will get through this together.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm totally gobsmacked and shocked at what you've told us in terms of the what's been happening on the ground. You know, I am appalled that our government has not done anything for children. You know, they are our next leaders, they're the next generation, and yet they seem to have been completely forgotten in this mess that we find ourselves in. I mean, the figures that you've given that's been spent on other industries, taxi industry, is, you know, staggering, those amounts, and yet absolutely zero for early childhood. That is, I can't even wrap my head around it. Before we close, thank you so much. You know, this has been amazing. This has been a real eye opener, and I think, you know, to shed some light on this, I want to ask everyone who's watching this live and on the replay, please share this, because, you know, this needs to get to the right ears. Something about this is not right, that we're not spending money on our children. And I want to ask you before we close, can you talk a little bit about your book, Mandela and Children, that you co-authored with Bridget Katz?
Bridget Getty, I'm at a point now where I've got such a good team of young people. Really, they are phenomenal. That all I do the whole day is sit and think and talk to other people. They do all the work. And I was thinking one day, Nelson Mandela would have been 100 years. And I asked myself the question, I wonder how many children Nelson Mandela met during his life. And I went to my young colleagues, including Chanel and Bridget, and said to them, you know, I'd love to find out how many children did Nelson Mandela meet in his lifetime and what was the impact? And they looked at me as though I was from another planet. They said, Eric, it's obvious. It's obvious. Put it out on social media.
Yeah.
So I put the question out on social media, and we were flooded. So we asked people, if you met Nelson Mandela as a child, when you were a child, please send us a photograph and write 300 to 400 words of what the impact was. And again, we were flooded with stories. We had Trevor Manuel's children sent in photographs and a story. The singer Danny Kaye, who you know, did the same. Tony Ngeni's daughter, who's now a 30-year-old woman, she wrote her story. And we compiled it, and it's a wonderful resource. if there are any of your viewers who would like a copy, contact the Center for Early Childhood Development and we will get them a copy at no cost.
Okay,
But
so
it is really wonderful.
I'm sticking my hand up. I know people that work there, so if any of them are listening, Eric, please make sure that I get a copy. I would love to read it.
Viola, it will be delivered tomorrow morning by one of my colleagues. I promise you. Really, it is a wonderful story. You know, if you on those down days, those days when you're not feeling so good, read that story and read the impact that Nelson Mandela had through a simple action of squeezing a child's hand.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the stories which for me encapsulates the man is that he and the Queen of England were walking down Government Avenue and they walked through a queue of children. There was a guard of honor of primary school children on either side. Now, no man in the world would do this other than Nelson Mandela. While walking down the gardens with the Queen of England, he stopped and he veered off, bent down, got down on his haunches, shook hands and spoke to a lot of children. While the Queen stood there in Government Avenue, a little bit bewildered. I mean, who leaves the Queen of England standing by herself? And that for me encapsulates Nelson Mandela. We've got another book coming out also by Bridget and myself, where we've taken all Nelson Mandela's speeches around children and we've compiled it into one collection. And we're going to get that out pretty soon. A wonderful man. And, you know, as he said, it's in our hands. And it's in our hands to put young children first.
Absolutely. And then also you have the Museum of Childhood, which I think is awesome. I've had a chance to go and visit the museum. It's great. Lots of fun to see all the games that we used to play with as kids. A fantastic space. So if any of our viewers are looking for that as well, we'll stick the information into the description at the bottom of the video and make sure that people actually spend some time just looking at that space. Eric, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been such an interesting discussion. And as I said, you know, I think Brigitte shares that it's just almost been shameful how government have responded towards our kids. And so we are going to ask everybody, please just share this video with whoever you can share this video with. The Center of Early Childhood Development needs our support. We need to continue to support our kids. I hear you when you say it's not teachers in these centers that are the primary educators of our kids. We are. And so, so whatever we can do to be of assistance, that would be great. Any parting words before we end the show?
Yes. First of all, both to yourself and to Brigitte, thank you very much for what you do. It's really, really wonderful. I think I want to leave you with a thought that everybody should ask themselves, what can I do?
Yeah.
You know, some people can give R1 million. Some people can hug a child. Both are of equal value. So if we value our young children, if we show them that we put them first, I think South Africa will be a better country. And I mean, who knows, that 4-year-old whose hair you ruffle may be the next Sia Kolisi, or that little girl who you pick up may be the next Olympic swimming champion. We never know what impact as adults we have on young children. And let's just do it. Let's just put young children first, and our country, our society will flourish. Then we will be living the Mandela legacy.
Yeah. And Eric, just from my side, my encouragement to you is continue to just sit and think, because clearly great ideas come out of that mind, out of that head of yours, and continue to just walk up to them and say to them, this is what we're doing, this is what we're executing, find a way to do it. I know that you've got an amazing team, you know, just in every conversation that we have, you're always referencing the work that they're doing. And I think it's important that we look at what's happening. Anything exciting happening, just closing, anything exciting happening that we can get our viewers to support? Any new programs you guys are looking at? Any campaigns you're looking at?
I think every single family no matter who you are or where you are, can do something. And
Yeah.
as I say, it doesn't have to be monetary. It can simply be, if you're a bricklayer, help an ECD center to lay some bricks. If you
Yeah.
can play the guitar, if you're a gogo who's got wonderful stories of your childhood, go to your early learning center and tell those stories. But if each adult worked and supported 3 or 4 young children, imagine what South Africa would be like in the next decade
Yeah.
or two.
Yeah. And Eric, would you all be open to I think there might be a lot of our viewers who might not necessarily be able to come up with great ideas. If they had 2 hours a day, or they could do something, or there's an early childhood center close to where they are, could they contact you all and then just like sort of give you the info and you guys help direct that assistance?
If they contact us at the Center for Early Childhood Development, no matter where they are across South Africa, we will put them in touch with an early childhood center. And really, those women who run those early childhood centers, and I say women because 99% of the workers of the workforce are female.
Yeah.
They would welcome you with open arms, and in a funny way, as much as you give to the children will give back to you.
Yeah.
And I always dream of one day seeing a child who was in an early childhood center as the next president of the country. And
Yeah.
that's where it starts. So if we can lay that foundation now, I think we're building a great future for this great country.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's so much for us to learn. There's so much for us to talk about. There's so many opportunities for us to help and for people to sort of give more of themselves. One of the things we've spoken about with COVID is that people have a lot more time. Although
Yeah.
one of the trends we're finding now is that even though you had a lot more time in the sort of first and second month, we're finding now people are just filling that time with more busyness. But if there's an opportunity for you and you do have some time, and I'm speaking specifically to our viewers, and you feel that you do want to make this contribution, the information for the center will be made available in the description below.
Yeah.
And we can definitely contact you and have that discussion. Thank you to you for the leadership that you provide your team. I think that a lot of your team take their inspiration from you and the work that you do. But I do have to ask this. You were in the media very recently around your professorship. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that quickly? And it's got to do with that old age thing again.
Yeah, look, I'm a reluctant academic because I was forced into it. I was seduced into it by colleagues of mine, and I should not have listened to them. But I love this. I love the students. I love the students. They're the greatest thing that there is. So I lecture social development and social policy at UCT.
Mm-hmm.
But I completed a doctorate about 2 years ago under the most wonderful supervisor that you can find, Professor Nuran Davids.
Okay.
And we've set up an extraordinary associate professor post in the Department of Education Policy Studies at Stellenbosch. And so I'm moving into doing some early childhood development work at Stellenbosch University.
Okay.
And when I tell my children this, they say to me, they ask me, how can somebody who failed Standard 6, who failed mock matric, and who failed first year university, end up as a professorship at 2 universities? And I say to them, reading, and reading.
Yeah. Look, I think that for us right now, it's been an amazing opportunity. It's been an amazing opportunity chatting to you. It's more than just about the fact that you failed and did all those things. I know it's part of the sort of quirkiness and part of the story, but I do believe it ends up inspiring a lot of people, because there's a lot of people, there's a whole generation, and I really do, we do need to end the show now, but there's a whole generation of kids that are so desperately concerned about their future. A lot of them are, the conversations that we're having now is that they may have to repeat a year. And a lot of our kids are sort of meeting that with a great sense of trepidation. And here we have somebody like you, who's made that part of your story. You failed standard 6, you failed mock matric, but you've been able to still move on and have such an impact in South African society. And I think it really is something that you must be quite proud of. It's something for you to be, to be sharing that story. It means a lot. So, Professor Atmore, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's been a long time coming. I do know, I'm not sure if you have any information about the show that the museum runs and that the center runs on Instagram. I do have a little bit of information about it. Do you want to share a little bit about it? I know that you were on the show recently.
Yeah. Every Thursday, normally at 12 o'clock or at 1 o'clock, one of my very, very talented colleagues, Chanel Fredericks, interviews a personality. It's a short half-an-hour interview about their childhood. And she's had some wonderful people on. Daniel Richards, the actor. She's had Jimmy Nevis, the singer, and a whole host of people. I think part of the motivation in setting that up is that we grow up too quickly and we forget our childhood. And interviewing somebody like Jimmy Nevis, who's a top star in South Africa, and asking about his childhood is so important. I think we forget our childhoods. So it's a little bit of nostalgia, but also it's inspirational that young people who go through difficult circumstances can triumph one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Professor Atmore, thank you so much for joining us. We've gone way over time, but there were just so many things that I wanted to ask you and comment on. Thanks for being with us. Thanks to all our viewers who watched and made contributions, made comments. And if you're watching this on the replay, please feel free to comment. We'd love to know about your childhoods. And again, just feel free to contact the center. Thank you very much, Prof. We really enjoyed having you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ciao.
Bye.